So thanks, Pratik, for joining me in today's first session of what could become Inside the Black Box. But we're going to be talking essentially as two researchers who have had long careers over different parts of the industry and different geographies and different cultures within those organizations. I've kind of thought about calling it Inside the Black Box just because this is something I felt moving from consultancy and client side into the world of supply and panel, where actually I think you've spent a lot of time as well, Pratik. So we're just
Absolutely.
going to be chatting about our experiences and see where the conversation takes us.
Absolutely excited to be on this, Neil. Thank you for having me.
So my first question to you today is really about how you've found the cultural differences impacting the collaboration in companies as well as the provision of the services to the end clients.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Honestly speaking, let's define culture first. Culture basically is all about heritage, right? Understanding what's been going on in your past, transferring it to your future, and you move on with it. And there's a lot of respect of the culture. I have been fortunate enough to get an exposure to a lot of cultures, and that's a real advantage for me to experience Asia, and specifically India to begin with, then coming over to Europe, then the US culture. So I've literally covered the whole globe, and that's why I just call myself a global citizen rather than just calling myself as a particular citizen of a specific country, because it has given me good exposure. So culture is something which is embedded, but it is most important is to respect the culture. So I think one of the main important thing is to understand the culture. So let's take an example of India working with Europe as a cultural heritage kind of a thing. So you have to kind of focus on that. Now, of course, Indian culture has got an extreme exposure since I began in my career as compared to what it is today. When I started, we didn't even know what was across the pond because we were so restricted to our part of the world, and we did not know what was outside that part of the world. So when I was given the first opportunity in my life to actually work on a sales RFQ for a US project, I didn't even know what was Dunkin' Donuts, because Dunkin' Donuts was supposed to be what's the IR of visitors in Dunkin' Donuts. I had no clue what Dunkin' Donuts was to begin with. So I think that is a starting point where one has to respect the exposure, because I think the next step comes in, what is the exposure of the people that you're working with? And it's fortunate now people have a lot of exposure due to media. They have a lot of exposure, but do they have the real time exposure? Not always. And I respect that. So, with that in mind, you have to definitely understand how to bring in or blend in these people to understand what the culture is. Because they are brilliant minds, they are brilliant people, but they are challenged with the exposure. So, I think that is an important factor to consider. What do you think about it? What
Yeah,
is your
I think that's very similar in the sense of I've actually spent a lot of time working in Japanese organizations after living there for a few years and experiencing Japanese culture within those organizations. And I think you're right about the respect and taking the positives. So, an example for me of the positives with working with the Japanese culture, one is respect, actually. It's so
right?
inherent and so expected with every interaction to a level which is not always easily translatable. And also in areas like, let's just pick something like detail. The understanding of what detail means is so different within each culture. And actually, you can learn a lot from that coming from the English culture, where detail is one thing, and in Japanese culture, where detail is another thing entirely. You can actually learn a lot from that and find you become actually one of the more detailed oriented people within your own culture after having experienced and learned from, as I would say, the best in detail in the
I would
world.
agree.
Mm-mm.
100% agree. And that is one thing which is a good point you brought in, which is also to be explored further. It's like for me, like I said, I call myself a global citizen because I take the best of the cultures, right? I try and pick out the best of the lot, right? So I have that soft kind of understanding, but I have the discipline of the German. So with the Indian perspective of softness and kindness and understanding, I also have that very I can't say very strict, but very straightforward way of saying no, which sometimes comes across very rude. but that is how it is. So the same, thanks to the last experience of mine, I also got exposed to the Japanese culture, and you're totally right. I totally agree with you. That is an important factor. And I think another factor which steps in also, if you have to consider about working with India from Europe, is the hierarchy system. Now that's an extremely, extremely strong system that exists, which is so undermined in certain cases, which can be very challenging when you're trying to understand, why is this person not responding to me? It's only because that person has to get an approval from three other people before he can even send you back that email. It's not that he's not ready with the email. He's ready with the email, but he needs approvals. And this is a very obvious and a very pathetic situation sometimes, because this frustrates the individuals who are talented. And again, I'm saying it's a cultural thing. It's nothing to do with a negative or a positive. It is a cultural thing. While Neil is getting upset that my answer is not coming through to me, the person is still trying to get an approval before he sends it over to you, because he would be in trouble, or she would be in trouble in case this has gone through.
That's actually a challenge I've heard from the English side research working with Japanese clients in the
Sure.
sense of they often present are used to working with people who in Europe who maybe are the decision makers in the research teams. So they say, for example, is this discussion guide finished? Is this screener finalized? And they're not always understanding the approval process and the hierarchy that that research has to face within a Japanese organization. And that can frustrate the English researcher who wants a decision like, are we moving forward recruiting these people? Are we not? Are we asking these questions? Are we not? And that's a challenge I've seen from the English side, working with the hierarchy within Japanese organizations for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I mean, covering all these topics, I mean, the counterattack to these things, I mean, we have to prepare ourselves to blend into the culture. Like I've used this before as well. It's like you need to be a cultural chameleon. You need to be a cultural chameleon. Now, chameleon usually is taken as a very negative thing, but I am meaning your skin has to be adapted to the atmosphere you are in, but your core has to be strong of what you believe your company to be in the future. So I
Mhm.
think that is one thing which you really need to learn in a business when you are actually adapting to a team across. It doesn't essentially have to be only India. It can be any of the teams when you adapt to any teams. So you've got to accept that for sure. And
I
I think
wanted
that's one of the most
also
important
to
things.
ask you about the experience from India to Germany, because I've worked in Germany for a Japanese organization actually, and there were
Mm,
actually surprisingly some similarities between Japanese and German in the structure and expectations of quality, for example. But there were also some differences. So one large difference I saw was the planning process. So when I was in Germany, our German side wanted to make a plan, make a good plan, stick to the plan because that's what we all decided the plan was, and
true.
to deliver that plan. Whereas in on the Japanese side, it was sometimes different. Again, from a positive point of view, but the plan can always be improved was often their background. And sometimes I saw those two approaches clashing, but often sometimes similar in terms of expectations of quality, striving for the best, detail oriented. But how did you find moving from India to Germany?
Well, so 19 years back, I moved over to Germany and I came straight from India. And that's a very specific question that people ask me. How did you come directly from New Delhi to Munich? And my answer is with a flight, as simple as that. Number one. Yes, of course I did, because it's a shocker for them. I had no stopover, I had no training, I just came over. Of course, the biggest difference that I found when I came over to Germany, one was language, of course, the big challenge, of course. Second, which came in, was the straightforwardness, the timing, the accuracy, the discipline was totally different. Again, I'm not saying that Indian culture is on a backward. Absolutely, they're forward. I am very proud of that. But the fact of the difference in culture, because we believe in India, we believe in what we're going to do should be done. But when it is done is a different story. But it will be done for you. But here it is like, when it is to be done, you commit the time, the date, and you deliver it. Right. So this was one of the things which initially was a little bit of a challenge to adapt to, because I was not used to it. One of the biggest examples I ever give everyone is when I was to go out with one of my colleagues. We were supposed to leave at 6:35. I was working on a project, and it was very well understood that I got to close the project, and only then would I leave the office. I came downstairs at 6:37. My colleague was gone. That was my first lesson to learn that those 2 minutes were so valuable that the person did not wait for me, even if it was work, because it was a commitment. Either I said 6:40 I'll be downstairs, or I should have said I'm not coming downstairs. But because of that lack of clarity, the deal was done. And that was a very harsh lesson to learn because as Indians, we are extremely flexible, very open to any kind of changes. But
Mm-mm.
here, there's no flexibility. It is what it is. Simple as that. And I respect both the cultures for their capabilities or quality, but you need to learn. So one of the biggest challenges that I mentioned were these two challenges, which I had to overcome and learn the best way.
I had a similar experience when I first moved to Germany because I'd say the British are pretty good with time, but we're kind of flexible if you're 1 or 2 minutes late. But I remember like being 2 minutes late with a colleague, so not a boss or just a colleague, and but he basically just said, "Is your time more valuable than mine?" And I was like, "Why do you ask?" Well, you've made me wait 2 minutes. And I think it was a fairly traditional kind of style mindset, and not saying it's a good or bad again, but it's just a difference from how I was used to, and yeah, and that's kind of interesting, and the other one I experienced with work was on a trip to India. And everything seemed to be 5 minutes. The journey was 5 minutes, or they'll see me in 5 minutes. But it never seemed to be 5 minutes. And actually, I was feeling the German mindset. When I went to India, I was feeling more aligned to the German mindset, was saying, well, this taxi ride is not going to be 5 minutes, is it? Like the taxi driver told me it'll be 5 minutes, but it's not 5 minutes. And I found myself experiencing the other side of that
Right.
time mindset or the idea behind it. It was really
Totally. Totally. And I think that's what you have to understand. That's the culture of politeness in India. That's the culture of politeness. It's not that they want to give you a misguiding kind of an idea. It's just that they're too polite to say, oh, it's going to take you 35 minutes. You'll be like, oh my God, 35 minutes is a long drive. When it's like 5 minutes, you're like, oh, okay, great. Well, it is not 5 minutes, but it's still comforting, I would say.
yeah. And I think one other interesting difference, I think, with India from what I've observed, and I'd like to ask you a bit more about, is comparing with the Japanese style and the British, or I would say British is more akin to the Indian style. But in Japan, we have like there's a phrase called tekto, or which means doing things properly or kichinto. Everything's in line, strictly, everything's done properly. Whereas my first jobs, I would say in research, I had more the experience that you're using your not winging it doesn't seem to be the right phrase, but you're using your experience and you might not necessarily plan everything properly. You might not necessarily have everything mapped out to the
Right.
detail, but you do have the experience to rely on yourself in that situation. So maybe I would go to a client meeting for some, but I've had enough client meetings to not prepare everything to the 100th degree. Whereas in Japan, that can be sometimes seen as like not doing things properly or not or doing things tekto, so not doing things properly. And so I wanted to ask you about that with your experience between India and Germany.
So, India, we have a very famous word, and every Indian is relating to this word very strongly. And I would put it as it's called a word called jugaad. Now, jugaad basically defines itself as make it happen. However, it happens, make it happen. Now, that is something which is working sometimes to the benefit of it, but sometimes to a challenge to it because you've made it happen for that particular time. It's like giving an example. If your pipe is not reaching the other pipe and the water has to flow through, you might just fix a plastic bag in the middle of it and the water will flow through it for another 3 months, 4 months, and then it's going to collapse. But for those 3 months, you have made that jugaad. So it is just as an example, it is a very particular thing or a very typical thing. Again, it's not a negative, but it's something we've always grown up with and made sure things happen. Because you have to also understand, India is so vast. It's so big in terms of size. There are a lot of things in terms of differences between even your economic statuses. Some people can afford a new pipe, some people can't. So how do you make it happen? You make it happen from the best of the resources that you can get around you, and you
Mm,
just make it happen.
mm.
But again, I'm not saying it's permanent, but it is something they've fixed for the time being.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are the kind of things you got to watch out and be sure about when you ask your Indian team, is this a jugaad or is this permanent? So it's just a joke around, but it is something which is important to understand. And when you understand all these aspects, you do understand that you can make better use and better flow of work from their
Mm,
colleagues in India. Because they respect you when you respect them for it. Because the biggest problem is they feel quite, as far as this is a slightly different deviation topic, they feel quite challenged when you are telling them to do things when you're not asking them to do things. It's
mm,
like, get this project out today. No, 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 no. What the right way is to ask is, hey, I know this project is difficult. How could I help you on this project? I know you're an expert and I know you can make it
mm,
happen. How can I help you with this? And then watch your colleagues work back on that
mm.
because they know you trust them, they know you want them to do it, and they know you're standing right behind them. There's a difference in the performance. And this is a promise. It's going to work every time because it is working anywhere, everywhere. I mean, I've worked with Europe so much, East Europe so much, around Europe. It's the same thing, respecting the people for who they are. I don't say I know everything. I say I know this and they know that, and I need to know what they know to make it a complete story.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you speak about Jugaad because I'm not a native Japanese speaker, so my mind would go to the word tekito, which kind of means making do or yeah, doing things, but it kind of has a nuance of not doing things properly or not doing things a bit sloppily, and it's very hard to make a positive out of that word.
It
So
is.
actually, in English, you can make there are times when you can make positives out of getting by, just doing enough, winging it. But I think there's always that idea in England that you're doing it based on your experience, so it's not an empty kind of getting by. So there is a sort of maybe a middle ground between the Jugaad and the Japanese.
Correct.
Well,
Totally correct. And
mm,
it is similar. Like I said, again, it's also when Jugaad is done by experienced people. An
mm,
electrician could put something which you don't even know what he's put in and put your wires together. It might burn out in about 15 days or 20 days, but he knows what he's done and he knows he's going to be called in 15 days back again to fix it. But that also comes through the fact that sometimes you just can't afford to spend for it. You're like, get it done somehow. I can't afford that extra amount that you want me to spend on that. Get it done for now. So
mm.
it is kind of how it's come into existence.
So, so bear in mind these cultural ways of working and between these countries. How do you feel the role we have increased technology now, more automation in the industry, um, uh, perhaps perhaps more less. Do you feel there's a less or more reliance on your automation technology, and maybe these cultural differences are less relevant, or do you feel that they're still there in all of their usual glory?
To answer that, I'll be clear. Language has never been a problem for India, which means the English language. And we know the reasons why. So we've been pretty good with that. So it's never been that, there was a misunderstanding in grammar or understanding in the English, because that is very, very strongly embedded in us. Uh, so we do not need technology for the translation part of it. What we really need technology in India is, again, I say most of the time at the moment, AI is a big buzzword, right? Now, are we really using AI for the right perspective and for the right culture? You got to again remember, AI needs to be blended according to the culture as well.
Mm,
AI is not a Google search that will give you a wide search and give you the answer for it. It has to be specific. Now, what is India focusing on right now in AI? Think about it from our industry. It's either panel management or quality management.
Yeah.
That's the main focus. Now, again, most of the companies you meet, they're about quality management or reward system, etc., etc. But is that really what we need at this point of time?
Mm.
That's the question I would ask the industry. Is that what we really need at this point of time? Don't we need something more specific to the culture we belong to or the culture we are trying to bring this AI tool into? And that makes a difference.
Mm.
And I think that if we can crack that, there's a difference for sure.
Mm.
Again, yes, most of the things what we're working on AI or whatever is basically macros, which is repetitive work, right? Repetitive work, you're just making it easier, you're just making it quicker, you're making it more accurate. But again, human head has to be involved into all these aspects. So we need to think about this more culturally, according to me.
Mm. Yeah, I think when I look at sort of the sort of technology, automation, etc., AI, etc., I feel like with Japan and a really big recent impact has been communication.
Yes.
Because English has been a challenge in Japan as an island with a different culture and different language, and really an industry set up to teach English. And people and the languages are very different. And like you say about exposure to the language. And this, I've seen the impact of AI on communication is quite huge, I think, in terms of Japanese or companies and people working internationally. So I've heard stories that recently emails are now being improved to a point where previously there was always misunderstandings, and now that really is limited to one or two sentences which aren't quite clear,
Right.
or a little bit unusual, a little bit unnatural, which doesn't matter anyway.
True.
So I see that the big impact in Japan on language, which I think is a great thing because it will improve some of these misunderstandings. Um, but I still don't see how it will address, like you say, I think there's still a step to go into addressing those cultural challenges. So, for example, it's quite a common challenge I heard in research with Japanese clients is unwillingness to decide when it's final because it can
Right.
always be improved. So whether you're talking a discussion guide, whether you talk about recruitment, whether you're talking about the report, the analysis, it's very hard to say, okay, uh, this is our final version, which is very common in English
Right.
language
Of
research.
course.
And something like that, where people will be talking and saying that okay, this is a final version, and it might come up through ChatGPT translated English. But what the client may expect is it might be different because they will still have the expectation to strive for the best results you can possibly get, not just call it the final version. So the client may have an image that a step hasn't been taken, or we haven't been diligent enough. Um, although it's made a massive impact and a positive impact, I still wonder how smooth the communication will be, even though the words are correct, if you like.
That's exactly what, that's very, very well said. And that's exactly what I'm trying to convey. Unless we don't hit the cultural string, the music is never going to be played, because it's definitely one thing which is sensitive is to understand. And like you said, the final version is very, very important for the Japanese. And they are very particular about making sure that there's a one version, two version, three. And I've never had so much of exposure to so many versions in my life before, but again, it's their perfection state, right? It is why they are where they are,
Yeah.
is because of that
And it's a
perfection
positive,
state.
like I would say, it's a positive, and you can learn from that. And also,
Absolutely.
you can
Absolutely.
push yourself to improve things when previously you may have decided that's enough. That's our
Yep.
final version for now. But actually, it does have a positive impact on the way we work.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true. And the same if I reflect back on India, the positive which is very strong is the dedication of the people.
Mhm.
If you look at the dedication of the people, you're talking to somebody in India and you're like, hey, can this be done? He or she, if they've committed to it, they will make sure they stick around till about whatever time it might need. and you will see them working late hours, even if they've gone back home and they start working again, they will make sure they will work it out for you and send that particular result back to you on a committed time, or maybe slightly later, but they will make sure that is delivered. So that's dependency, right? And again, how are we using that dependency from the perspective of business growth?
Yeah.
That is up to you, is up to an entrepreneur who will use that to the most effective way. But don't abuse it. And that's what we need to understand, the difference between abuse and how to use that. That's very important.
Well, I think that wraps up today's first session, and we'll look in the future to talking about such topics as AI,
I'm excited.
quality, the cultural nuances within the organization, and how to work with team members and clients in a bit more and in structural terms. And we'll keep looking inside that black box.
We are looking forward to it. Thank you so much for it, Neil. And let's get connected soon and be back soon. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.